I really enjoyed that video, especially the part where he was talking about how, when his friend did the trip, he's like, that was time for my experience or my voyage or whatever. And then he fell on the floor and then, wasn't breathing, looked like he was dying. Like, I've experienced all those things. And then his friend seemed to be having a very difficult time, and then came out and started speaking like he was Satan or something, And that's been my experience with DMT trips, is like the first trip, if you break through, it was funny that he didn't break through because he's describing his experience. I'm sitting there going like, that's not a breakthrough, bud.
Yeah.
Cartoon land is not the breakthrough, And then when his friend came back and he's just like, I hate to tell you, but you didn't do it right. And then he goes on his trip and then comes back and says, they told me that you got to do it right now. Like that's what they want.
Yeah.
And I've had that exact experience on both sides of it almost, so it was really strange, because I have noticed that the more experience you get with psychedelics, the less forgiving they are, right? They really kick the shit out of you, and they really kind of show you that you're, it's part of the ego thing, I think, the dismantling of the ego, but it really, the more experience you get, the more entities you meet, and the less forgiving and friendly they are. And the way he described his initial breakthrough with the serpent of knowledge, I had that same experience, and it's told me the same thing. Mine wasn't about comedy. My message was about music and my relationship with psychedelic drugs, because I was finding myself conflicted, right? Because being a fan of Pink Floyd, I know a lot about Syd Barret. Or at least I've heard a lot about Syd Barret. I can't say I know a lot about Syd Barret because how those stories go. They get twisted. Like according to Richard Wright, Syd Barret wasn't even doing LSD. It wasn't LSD. It was some other drug. I forget what he called it, like STP or something like that. But I looked it up, and it's a real psychedelic. But it's not Albert Hoffman's formula. It's something completely different. Which makes sense because my experience with LSD, it can't be abused. Anybody that abuses LSD just ends up wasting their time. It's got no, like if you do LSD today and then do LSD again tomorrow, after 3 or 4 days, you have no more neurological effects. Yeah, at most you might get a slight tingling or something as if you've had a drink.
Yeah,
but there's no.
There was something, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but my theory is that there was something going around in the late 60s that stretched on into the early 70s, and a number of artists and musicians and people like that had really, really bad experiences and blamed it on LSD. So that's interesting. I didn't know that Richard Wright had said that there was something else going around. That could well be the case, because Mike Oldfield was one of them as well, that he had really, really terrible experiences which had really affected the rest of his life, and he for a long time was holding on by his fingernails. He talks about it in his book. So it's very interesting. There was Brian Wilson as well, had a terrible experience. There was Peter Green, another one. There was a whole bunch of them that just it completely fucked them up,
Apparently Peter Green was the same peer group as Syd Barret. It was the same people and the same drug, the same house that he got introduced to the drug.
Yeah, but if you think about it,
I heard.
If you think about it, in those days, there wouldn't have been. Well, I don't know for sure, but I'm imagining that there could have been a situation where you had a batch of something that was made, and it had an effect on you that could be confused with LSD, and that batch went around. And that batch, if it was made on an industrial basis, it could have been quite a substantial batch, but there weren't that many people doing those kind of things, or that many people prepared to do those kind of things. It probably existed in London, in Los Angeles, New York, places like that, but where I lived, there wouldn't have been anybody who was into that. There would be today, but there wasn't in those days. So there's probably a very small group of people who were experimenting with these things, kind of coming off the idea that the Beatles had these wonderful experiences and led to this wonderful music that they made, which they attributed at least in part to their psychedelic experiences. So musicians were probably wanting to tap into that, but instead of getting hold of some good stuff, they got hold of the bad stuff. But my theory is that batch could have been around for years. In one way or another, and that's why it extends over about a 5-year period. There's a whole bunch of casualties that just, and in fact, my memory's so bad I can't remember them all, but I keep coming across new ones and going, oh, that's that time frame, that's in that exact same time frame. Yeah, so the idea of the acid casualty might it might, as you say, it might not be actual LSD, because it's very. I mean, I've heard people talking about is it strychnine that gives you similar initial effects?
I've heard about this. I've heard different rumors about that, and unfortunately, because all that stuff floated around pre-internet, a lot of it's broken telephone. Because I had a buddy of mine who taught me how to fix appliances, who used to be a tripper, and then he got away from it because he said LSD drove him crazy, and he said there was strychnine in it, and he said that there's something about every time he would sweat, he claimed that the strychnine would be releasing from his pores and giving him flashbacks and having him make him re-trip. And to me, that just sounds absurd, absolutely absurd. But again, I'd never experienced anything like that before, and I've honestly done more LSD than anybody I know. I mean, as far as I can't say I've done more LSD than Ozzy Osbourne or Geezer Butler. I don't know those guys, but I mean, any psychedelic user I've encountered in my real life, I've never had anybody claim to have had as many psychedelic experiences as I have.
Well, that might explain the idea of it coming out in your sweat or something, some metabolic thing that happens. That might explain the idea of LSD flashbacks, because that's a thing that I had heard about. I don't know her so much anymore, but she was a good bit older than me. She was about 10 or 15 years older than me, and she was there in the 60s, and she talked about acid flashbacks, that she knew a lot of people who would just be going about their business, and suddenly bang, they were back in the experience. So if that was not LSD, that would explain why that was happening too.
It could be. And the thing too with flashbacks that always rubs me the wrong way is because when people describe in detail what they're experiencing, these mild LSD sensations and things they call HPPD, I was experiencing those symptoms before I ever tried drugs. I remember being a child and experiencing how people describe a flashback. And so in my own personal experience and the way I perceive it is that psychedelics make you more in tune with the subtleties of your perception, so that when you do experience these weird things where your physical body and the outside reality isn't quite jiving right, and you're having these experiences where things are moving, or you're seeing tracers of light, or things change speed, people talk slower or faster. In my school when I was a kid, the industrial flooring they put in the bathrooms, it would be this a large tile that looked like little tiny pebbles that have been cut in half, and I'm not sure if that's what it is or not, but it looks like little stones that are flat. And I would look at those too, and they would sort of oscillate and kind of move a bit, And I would find that if I stare at a stucco ceiling, the stucco patterns would oscillate, like the wallpaper you have behind you there. I don't know if that's a pattern or if it's, I don't know what it is. Where under the guitar is that wallpaper or paint, or what is that?
Yeah, that's wallpaper. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. If I would stare at that, it would kind of just sort of slightly do this, and not if I focus on it, only if I lack focus a little bit, but then I'm still focusing, but almost like a peripheral focus. So I've been doing that since I was a child.
So what you're saying is that this is just part of the normal parameter of having a sensory apparatus and an interpretive device that takes that information and processes it. What you're saying is there are all kinds of anomalies going on all the time, which you probably filter out. But having had a psychedelic experience which puts you in touch with all of those mechanisms a lot more, you're then conscious of that. But the kind of flashbacks that my friend, it's a lady called Yona Aitken, that Yona was talking about, these were full-blown, I'm back in it, psychedelic experiences, not these kind of anomalous kind of sensory things. This was this is full-on sort of thing. So I don't know if you've had any experiences like that. Probably not.
The only time I've experienced something like that, where it came in that regard, like a full-on psychedelic revisitation type thing, only happened while I was on psychedelics, which sounds strange, but for example, when I first couple times I had salvia breakthroughs with the outer body experience and all that stuff, I remember it was a month or two later, I was eating mushrooms with a friend, and I blacked out during my mushroom trip, and I was revisiting my salvia trip.
Wow.
And I didn't black out, fall on the ground. I was sitting on the floor, leaning, I was on the floor, sitting beside a coffee table. I'd probably just smoke some weed or something. We had music playing. And I remember I had one of those really nice, my grandfather gave me this beautiful Turkish rug, which unfortunately moths ended up eating at one point. I didn't realize this rug was worth $8,000 or something crazy. But he just, but yeah, and I let moths eat it. But at the time, I remember sitting on this rug, and it was a very comfortable place for me to like have psychedelic experiences. And I just kind of like, my eyes just kind of like went outwards. My friend described, guys, my eyes were fully open, but I wasn't there. Like he was like, "Are you okay? What's up?" And I just didn't say anything for a minute or two. Came back, and I was just sort of like gave my head a shake and was like, "Whoa!" And he was just like, "What just happened there?" And I was like, "Did we just smoke salvia?" He's like, "Nope, you just kind of went off and came back." And so that's the closest thing I've experienced to that. And I just assumed what happened there was, because we talked about the similarity between DMT and salvia and breakthrough experiences. Psilocybin and DMT are almost identical in their effects and structure,
right.
but because of the way psilocybin affects you, it's like a mild DMT experience that lasts for hours. So I have a feeling that just something about the chemical or the amount of mushrooms, because that's at a time too when I was eating, like when I ate mushrooms, sometimes I would eat a half ounce or like an unreal amount compared to your average dosage, right? So I may have just a large amount of psilocybin may have just activated that moment or whatever it was. I don't know what it was, but having someone have a blackout phase and a heavy mushroom experience isn't strange, but I've never experienced it that I can recall other than that moment. And any other time I may have experienced it, I may have been by myself or the moment was like we were listening to music and we're on the couch with our eyes closed. So if I have a blackout experience, I don't notice it. I just think it's part of the experience,
Right.
But that's for me. But I've never had like a moment in my waking life where I'm sober, where I had this sudden experience where I'm like, oh my God, I'm tripping again. Like never even close, never once, but
no, I think
am
that
I lucky or am I just,
no, I think you're probably experiencing the proper drug. And I think that those guys that had that bad experiences, it probably wasn't what they thought it was. I having spoken to you just now, I think that's probably more what's happening. Yeah, for sure. Such a shame, really, because a lot of them. I know Mike Oldfield. He struggled with alcoholism because of that. He was a kind of you see, a lot of these people are put down as being fragile characters anyway. Like Syd Barret was and Mike Oldfield was, kind of introspective. I guess today we would say they're maybe autistic or something like that. And it's they put LSD with that pre-existing condition and say, well, the LSD drove them over the edge. Brian Wilson was the same. I don't know about Peter Green. I don't know what kind of personality he was beforehand, but I don't think it was that. I think in retrospect, the people themselves, if they talk about it, might believe that's what's happened, because we all have that kind of fragility as youngsters, and most of these people who did this were youngsters. So you have that fragility, and you go into the psychedelic experience, and it goes horribly wrong, and it affects your whole life, and it changes the path of your life in a negative way. You then say, well, you look around, well, not everybody's having this experience. Other people are, the Beatles are making fantastic albums after having a psychedelic experience. Why isn't that for me? Oh, it must be because I'm faulty in some way.